They didn't just fire me, they humiliated me. They made sure I walked out of that building with my head down, my confidence shattered, and my future, supposedly, destroyed. All because I was pregnant. They thought that was the end of my story. It was only the beginning. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you can't have both career and family, hit that subscribe button, because this is the story of how I turned my firing into the sweetest revenge of my life. My name is Rachel Porter. 2 years ago, I worked as a marketing manager for a well-known retail brand in Chicago. I was good at my job. No, I was great at my job. I'd been there for nearly 6 years, built entire campaigns from scratch, saved them from multiple PR disasters, and yet the minute they learned I was pregnant, it was like a switch flipped. At first it was subtle. They stopped giving me high-profile projects, meetings I used to lead. Suddenly, I was just a silent attendee. I wasn't invited to after-hours networking events anymore. People whispered in the break room when I walked in. And then came the big one. I had been working for months on a new nationwide rebranding campaign. My idea, my vision, my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. We were just weeks away from launching it when my boss, Greg Walters, called me into his office. He smiled in that fake corporate way and said, Rachel, we've decided you're going to step back from this project. With your upcoming life changes, it's best you focus on smaller tasks for now. I remember blinking at him. Upcoming life changes? He couldn't even say the word pregnant. But Greg, I said, this is my campaign. He raised a hand, cutting me off. It's final. Hand over your files to Mark. He'll be taking over from here. Mark, a guy who'd been with the company for less than a year, who'd once called Instagram the Google of pictures, in a meeting. It was like being slapped. I walked out of his office in a haze, my stomach churning, not from morning sickness, but from pure, cold rage. For weeks, I swallowed it. I told myself to just get through the pregnancy, that maybe I was overreacting. But then, one Friday afternoon, they called me into HR. Sitting there was Greg, HR rep Susan, and a folder with my name on it. They gave me some ridiculous speech about restructuring and eliminating positions, even though a week later, they posted my exact role online. Only now the title was Marketing Director, and the salary was higher. I remember every detail of that moment. The way Susan avoided my eyes, the smirk Greg tried to hide, the way my hands trembled as I signed the papers. I walked out with my small box of belongings, my framed photo of my husband and me, a coffee mug that said Boss Lady, a plant that didn't survive much longer than my job did. When I reached the parking lot, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That's when I made a promise to myself. This wasn't the end. They had taken my job, they had taken my dignity, but I was going to take something much bigger from them. I was going to take their company. The night after they fired me, I barely slept. I kept replaying every meeting, every subtle dig, every moment I'd been pushed aside. But somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m., my anger started to shift into something sharper, something useful. I realized I knew them. I knew their weaknesses. Not just the obvious ones like Greg's arrogance or Mark's incompetence. I knew the cracks in the foundation of the entire company. For 6 years, I'd been in the room for every quarterly review, every budget discussion, every damage control meeting. I knew their biggest clients. I knew which suppliers they were barely keeping happy, and I knew, better than anyone, how fragile their reputation really was. So instead of crying myself to sleep, I opened my laptop and started making a list of every vulnerability I could think of. By sunrise, I had 3 pages and a new purpose. The first step wasn't revenge, it was survival. I had a baby on the way, and I needed income. So I started small, freelance marketing work for local businesses. But here's the thing. I never turned down a project that connected me, even indirectly, to their industry. Every contact, every supplier, every disgruntled ex-client of theirs. I introduced myself. I listened. And I learned. By month 3, my freelance work had turned into something bigger. Bigger clients, bigger budgets. And then, an idea started to form. What if I stopped being just Rachel the freelancer and became something they couldn't ignore? I registered Porter Creative Solutions. On paper, it was just another marketing consultancy. In reality, it was a stealth operation with one clear mission: position myself as the only solution to the exact problems I knew they'd face sooner or later. I built a small team, people I trusted, a web developer who could make any campaign sparkle, a PR consultant who knew how to handle a corporate scandal, a data analyst who could spot market trends months in advance. We weren't just good, we were dangerous. And then, my chance came. 6 months after my daughter Lily was born, news broke that Greg's company had lost their biggest client, a chain of department stores that accounted for nearly 30% of their revenue. It was a PR disaster. They scrambled to replace the lost income. But the industry was already buzzing. They were vulnerable, exactly like I knew they'd be. I didn't make a move. Yet. I waited, because I knew one crisis never came alone. And I was right. 3 months later, they launched a new marketing campaign, the kind of glossy, overpriced nonsense Greg loved, but it backfired. Badly. Social media tore it apart, sales plummeted, and then I got the call. It was from Andrew Blake, one of their board members. He'd heard about my work through a mutual contact. They needed help. Fast. He didn't know, not yet, that the woman he was calling was the same one Greg had escorted out of the building 2 years ago. I said yes. And as I hung up the phone, I smiled. The game was about to begin. The day of the meeting, I dressed with precision, not to impress them, but to remind them exactly who they had underestimated. A tailored navy blazer, hair pulled back, minimal jewelry, the kind of look that says, I own the room before I even speak. When I arrived at their headquarters, it felt strange to walk through those glass doors again. Last time, I'd been carrying a cardboard box. This time, I carried a leather portfolio and a reputation that preceded me. At reception, the young assistant barely looked up before asking, Name? Rachel Porter, I said. She froze for a fraction of a second, the name clearly familiar, and then her professional smile snapped back into place. Right this way. The conference room was full when I entered. Greg was at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair like a king surveying his court. Mark, yes, that Mark, sat 2 seats down, looking smug as ever. And then there was Andrew, the board member who had reached out to me, standing to shake my hand. Rachel, thank you for coming on such short notice, Andrew said warmly. Greg's smile faltered the second he recognized me. Rachel Porter. He said my name like it tasted bitter. Yes, I said evenly. I understand you're in need of some damage control. I took my seat at the far end of the table, deliberately opposite Greg. From this vantage point, I could see every twitch, every subtle flicker of discomfort cross his face. The meeting began with Andrew outlining the crisis. Sales down 40%, public perception tanking, competitors circling like vultures. It was worse than I'd imagined, which made it perfect. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't start with a presentation. I started with a question. Do you want to save this company, or do you want to save your pride? The room went still. Greg opened his mouth, but I didn't let him answer. Because the two are not the same thing. If you want to keep running things the way you've been running them, I suggest you call someone else. If you want results, you're going to listen to me. There was a murmur around the table. Even Mark shifted uncomfortably. Greg's jaw tightened. And what exactly makes you think you're the one to fix this? I smiled, slow, deliberate, because I know this company better than anyone in this room. I know your clients, your suppliers, your market. I know your strengths, and more importantly, I know your weaknesses. I leaned forward, and I know exactly how you got here. Because I warned you this would happen. 2 years ago, before you fired me." The silence was electric. Greg couldn't look at me. Andrew broke it with a decisive nod. "Rachel, you have full authority to do whatever's necessary. We'll formalize it in the contract." Greg's head snapped toward him. "Full authority?" "Yes," Andrew said, "effective immediately." I didn't gloat. Not yet. But inside I felt it. The shift. The moment the hunter became the hunted. And I knew. This was only the beginning of their reckoning. From the moment the contract was signed, I stopped being a consultant and became the architect of their future. The difference was simple. Now I didn't have to ask for permission. I was the permission. On my first day with full authority, I called an emergency meeting with every department head. Greg wasn't there, by design. I wanted the people who actually kept the company running to know that I valued their time more than I valued his ego. I started with the truth. This company is not dying because of the market. It's dying because of poor leadership, bad decisions, and a refusal to adapt. That changes today. In the following weeks, I tore through every department like a surgeon removing dead tissue. Outdated systems? Gone. Pointless meetings? Canceled. Vague responsibilities? Redefined with crystal clarity. And then came the harder part. The people. I reviewed every senior manager's track record. If they had performed well, they stayed. If they had coasted on politics or connections, they were done. That's how Mark found himself sitting across from me in my office, looking like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. "You can't fire me," he said, half laughing, half desperate. "Greg will never allow it." I leaned back in my chair. "Greg doesn't get a vote anymore." He opened his mouth again, but I slid a termination letter across the desk. "It's already signed. Security will escort you out." The look on his face was almost poetic. Greg, on the other hand, was more complicated. The contract didn't give me the power to fire him outright, but it gave me something better. The ability to strip him of every meaningful responsibility. I reassigned his projects. I bypassed him in all decision-making. I made sure his calendar was filled with tasks so irrelevant it was clear to everyone he was a figurehead at best. Eventually, he stopped coming to the office altogether. But my vision wasn't just about removing the wrong people. It was about replacing them with the right ones. For the first time in the company's history, women held half of the leadership positions. I brought in young, innovative thinkers, people who weren't afraid to challenge ideas. We launched targeted campaigns that actually connected with the market. Within 6 months, profits surged. The media noticed. A profile in Business Today called me the strategist who resurrected a sinking ship. They didn't know the whole truth, that resurrecting the ship was just step one. The real satisfaction came from knowing I'd done it my way. And yet, I wasn't finished. Not until the last loose ends were tied. Not until Greg understood, without question, that the woman he'd once dismissed had taken everything he thought was his. That moment was coming. And I was going to make sure it was unforgettable. Greg had been a ghost for weeks. No real decisions, no presence in meetings, barely a shadow of the man who used to bark orders from the top floor. But he still had one thing, his seat on the board, and I intended to take that too. The annual shareholders meeting was the perfect stage. I had been preparing for months, quietly building alliances, sharing just enough of Greg's mistakes to make the right people uneasy. When the day came, the vote was already decided before anyone stepped into the room. The conference hall was packed, the air thick with tension. Greg sat across from me at the long, polished table, his expression unreadable. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew something was coming. I opened with the numbers. Cold, undeniable facts. Revenue had tripled since I took over operations. Market share was at an all-time high. Client satisfaction was up 60%. And then I brought out the receipts. Financial missteps, reckless partnerships, and contractual violations, all tied directly to Greg's leadership before I returned. Each point landed like a hammer, leaving no room for excuses. "This company," I said, letting the silence stretch, "is thriving in spite of its former leadership, and it will continue to thrive only if that leadership is removed entirely." The room was still. Greg's jaw flexed, but he stayed silent. He knew fighting now would only humiliate him further. Andrew cleared his throat. "All in favor of removing Greg Hart from the board, say aye." A chorus of voices answered. The ayes were overwhelming. Greg's face went pale. His title, his influence, his last shred of power, gone in a single vote. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Instead, I stood and walked over to him, leaning just close enough for only him to hear. "You once told me I didn't belong in this room. Now, Greg, you're not in it at all." Security escorted him out, and for the first time I watched him walk through those glass doors the way I had years ago, small, defeated, clutching his own cardboard box. The poetic symmetry wasn't lost on me. When I returned to the table, the shareholders were already talking about next steps, about expanding, about the future. A future I had built. A future Greg would watch from the outside. And as the meeting moved on, without him, I knew. The final cut had been clean, precise, and irreversible. It's strange. When the dust settles, victory doesn't roar. It's quiet. It's the calm after a storm you've been walking through for years. The day after Greg's removal, I came into the office early, just as the sun was rising. The building, once heavy with tension, felt lighter now, like the walls themselves were exhaling. I walked past the glass conference room where I had once been told to take notes instead of speaking, past the corner office where Greg used to lean back in his chair and dismiss my ideas. Now, every space carried a different energy. On the front of the building, the maintenance crew was already at work. The old company logo, the one Greg had guarded like a crown, was being taken down piece by piece. In its place, a sleek new emblem was being installed. It was more than branding. It was a declaration. Inside, the new leadership team gathered in my office. Half of them were women, the other half men who actually valued collaboration over control. They spoke with excitement, tossing around ideas, challenging each other with respect. It was the kind of environment I had once only imagined. We were no longer just surviving. We were building. Later that day, a journalist from Business Today came to do a follow-up interview. She asked me what it felt like to go from being overlooked to leading the very people who had doubted me. I thought for a moment before answering. When they underestimated me, they gave me the one thing I needed most, the element of surprise. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to rise high enough that they couldn't ignore me anymore. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood at the window of my office, looking out at the city lights. The reflection in the glass wasn't the woman they once dismissed. It was the woman who had taken everything back, with precision, patience, and purpose. And somewhere out there, I knew Greg was watching the company's success from a distance. That thought didn't bring me anger. It brought me closure. Because the best revenge is not just winning, it's changing the game so completely they can never play it the same way again. If this story kept you watching until the end, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories of smart, calculated revenge and ultimate turnarounds, subscribe now so you never miss what's coming next.